My name is Marissa Hale, and I was 39 years old when I finally understood that my marriage had never really been a marriage at all. It had been an arrangement. A polished, smiling, socially acceptable arrangement where I funded everyone's comfort, absorbed everyone's chaos, and got called difficult the moment I stopped saying yes. I did not know my life would change the way it did that night. Not in some dramatic courtroom, not with shattered plates or screaming neighbors, but at a dinner table covered in lace placemats, half-finished wine glasses, and a roast chicken that had already gone cold, while my husband and his family casually tried to humiliate me into paying for my own disrespect. I can still see the room when I close my eyes. My mother-in-law, Patricia, sitting at the head of the table in pearls and that thin, satisfied smile she always wore when she thought she had control. My brother-in-law, Dylan, slouched on the sofa with his guitar case by his feet, pretending not to listen while listening to everything. His girlfriend, Emma, cross-legged on the rug, bracelets sliding down her wrists as she arranged crystals on the coffee table, like they could protect her from the insanity in that house. And then there was my husband, Jason, handsome, charming, the kind of man who knew exactly how to soften his voice when he wanted something expensive, the kind of man who could post a picture of us online with a caption about gratitude and partnership, while I quietly paid for the life he and his family treated like a birthright. I had already paid for the flights, the resort, the rooms, the excursions, every last detail of the Bahamas trip Jason had sweetly suggested we take to reconnect. Then Patricia lifted her wine glass, tapped it gently with her fork, and with the calm of someone announcing dessert, told me there had been a tiny change in plans. Tiny. That word should have warned me. Before I could even ask, Jason looked at me and admitted he had invited Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, to come on the vacation I was paying for. A second later, Patricia added that her ex-husband Richard would be joining too. I remember blinking at them, my fingers tightening around my napkin, my heartbeat turning thick and hard inside my chest. My husband, his ex-girlfriend, my mother-in-law, her ex-husband. A luxury family vacation funded by me. And everyone in that room looked at me like I was the one expected to smile. That was the moment something inside me went still, not broken. Still, because when a woman has been used for too long, there comes a moment when the hurt burns itself clean and leaves behind something colder, something sharper. That was the night I stopped being their provider. That was the night I began walking away. Before everything unraveled, I would have described myself in very practical terms. I was a software engineer. 39, organized, reliable, the kind of woman who color-coded calendars, paid bills early, and kept emergency folders on my laptop for everything from tax records to appliance warranties. I liked systems because systems made sense. If something was broken, you traced the error, identified the weak point, fixed it, and moved on. People were harder, especially the people you loved. Jason and I met 11 years earlier at a friend's rooftop birthday party in Chicago. I had gone only because a coworker insisted I needed to leave my apartment and stop spending Saturday nights debugging code with takeout containers stacked beside my monitor. I remember standing near the string lights with a plastic cup of bad wine in my hand when Jason walked over in a navy button-down with his sleeves rolled up and a smile so easy it felt almost unfair. "You look like you're either solving a murder," he said, glancing at my face, "or silently judging everyone here." I looked at him for a second and said, "Can't it be both?" He laughed immediately, not fake, not forced. He laughed like he appreciated being challenged. That was the first thing that drew me in. He didn't seem intimidated by me. He seemed amused, curious, warm. We spent most of that night talking. Work, family, travel, stupid first jobs, the kind of music we pretended not to like anymore. He said I was different from the women he usually met because I listened before I spoke. I told him he was smoother than he thought he was. He grinned and said, "So it's working a little." It was. Back then, Jason had a way of making me feel less like the dependable woman everyone leaned on, and more like a woman someone actually saw. He noticed small things, how I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was thinking, how I always ate the pickles off everyone else's plates, how I became quiet when I was tired instead of irritable. When he reached for my hand 3 weeks later on our 4th date, his thumb brushing gently across my knuckles, I remember feeling this strange, unexpected softness in my chest. I had not been looking for rescue. I had not been looking for a grand romance. But I was looking for rest. And Jason, at least in the beginning, felt like rest. For the first year, things were simple. Good, even. He was attentive without being overbearing, affectionate without making everything theatrical. We went to bookstores on Sundays, watched terrible movies with commentary mean enough to make us cry laughing, and took long walks after dinner where he would talk about wanting a calmer life, a stable life, a real partnership. "I'm tired of shallow people," he told me once as we sat on a park bench in early autumn, the wind lifting dry leaves around our shoes. "I want something solid." I believed him. I think that's what still stings when I look back. Not that he lied once, it's that he learned the language of what I valued and used it beautifully. When I met his family, the warning signs were there, but they arrived dressed as ordinary discomfort. Patricia hugged me too tightly the first time, then pulled back and looked me over with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Well," she said lightly, "you're not what I expected." Jason laughed it off. "Mom." "What?" she said, lifting one shoulder. "She's lovely. I just thought you'd marry someone softer." I smiled, because women learn to smile through insults that arrive wearing perfume. His younger brother Dylan was easier to handle. He was 30, but still moved through life like a 19-year-old who thought talent alone would eventually organize itself into a future. He had a garage band, endless opinions, and that particular confidence some men have when they've never had to carry the full weight of consequences. Still, he could be funny in a harmless way, and in the early years, I mistook aimlessness for innocence. Jason always had an explanation for their behavior. "That's just Mom. Dylan doesn't mean anything by it. You know how families are." No, I didn't. Not like that. My family was quieter, less dramatic. We didn't weaponize guilt at dinner or turn every favor into an emotional debt. We didn't demand closeness while disrespecting boundaries. But I loved Jason, so I kept adjusting, a little at first, then more than I realized. Before we got married, I started noticing how often "we" really meant me. Jason was between jobs for a while, which I understood. Life happens. Careers stall. Confidence slips. I covered more dinners, then more rent, then whole weekends away he insisted we both needed. He always framed it as temporary, and because I loved him, temporary sounded reasonable. "Once I'm back on my feet," he said one night, pulling me against him on the couch, "I'll make all of this up to you." I rested my head on his shoulder and asked quietly, "You promise?" He kissed my forehead. "I promise." A woman in love can survive on promises longer than she should. After the wedding, the pattern deepened so gradually it almost felt natural. Jason's small emergencies became our expenses. Patricia's crises became family obligations. Dylan's one-time needs kept appearing with suspicious regularity. New amplifier, dental issue, car repair, security deposit, business idea, holiday shortfall. Every request came wrapped in urgency and expectation, and somehow I was always the one expected to absorb the impact. At first, Jason asked, then he assumed. Then Patricia stopped pretending to ask at all. "You're good with money," she told me once in my own kitchen, reaching for a second glass of wine like she lived there. It's a blessing when one person in the family knows how to provide. Not support, not contribute, provide. The word sat badly inside me, but I ignored that too. Because there were still moments, small, dangerous moments, when Jason made me believe the marriage underneath all that strain was real. Late night takeout when the house was finally quiet. his hand settling at my waist as he passed behind me, the sleepy smile he gave me some mornings before either of us spoke. Those moments kept me invested. They made me question my own frustration. They made me think maybe I was being too harsh, too rigid, too focused on fairness. That is the trap, I think. Not every unhappy marriage is unhappy all the time. Sometimes it gives you just enough tenderness to keep you from naming the pattern clearly. By year 6, Patricia no longer hid her contempt for the fact that I had boundaries. By year 7, Dylan treated my help like a subscription service. And Jason, my husband, the man who once told me he wanted something solid, had quietly become fluent in disappointment. No matter what I paid for, arranged, fixed, or smoothed over, there was always a way I had not done enough. If I booked the hotel, I chose the wrong one. If I covered the bill, I brought it up too much. If I hesitated, I was selfish. If I objected, I was dramatic. Still, I stayed, not because I was weak, because I was committed. Because I believed effort mattered. Because women like me are taught that if we are just patient enough, clear enough, generous enough, eventually love will become visible in the shape of reciprocity. It took me 8 years to understand that some people do not love your generosity. They depend on it. And dependence, when mixed with entitlement, becomes something very ugly. I just did not know yet how ugly it was about to get. If I'm honest, the shift didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where I looked at Jason and suddenly didn't recognize him. It was slower than that, quieter, like something leaking beneath a surface that still looked intact if you didn't stare too long. At first, it was just small changes. He started asking less and expecting more. "Can you just cover this for now?" became, "You'll handle it, right?" The tone changed before the words did. Less gratitude, more assumption. And every time I felt that flicker of discomfort, I told myself not to overthink it. I had always been the practical one, the stable one. It made sense that I would carry more when things got uneven. But uneven slowly turned into one-sided. I remember one Tuesday evening, standing in the kitchen while the dishwasher hummed behind me, staring at a spreadsheet I had open on my tablet. Monthly expenses categorized down to the smallest detail. My salary covered everything: mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, and then the extras that weren't supposed to be permanent. Patricia's temporary dental procedure from 2 years ago that somehow turned into ongoing cosmetic treatments. Dylan's investment in new music equipment that never generated anything except louder complaints. And Jason, who had technically found work again, but somehow never contributed in a way that balanced anything out. I heard him come in behind me. "You're still doing that?" he asked casually, reaching into the fridge. I didn't turn around. "Just reviewing things." He popped open a soda, took a sip, then leaned against the counter like nothing in the world required urgency. "You worry too much, Mari." That name, Mari. Soft, familiar. The same way he used to say it when he wanted to calm me down or quiet me. I closed the tablet slowly and turned to face him. "I'm not worried. I'm trying to understand why I'm covering almost everything." He sighed, not heavily, just enough to suggest inconvenience. "We've talked about this. Things are just transitional right now. They've been transitional for years." There was a pause. Not loud, not explosive, but thick. Jason's jaw tightened just slightly. "You're making it sound worse than it is." I held his gaze. "Am I?" He looked away first, taking another sip like the conversation bored him. "You always do this. You turn normal situations into problems." Normal. That word stayed with me long after the conversation ended, because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't normal, but I didn't push further. That was my pattern back then. I would approach the truth, feel the tension rising, and then step back just before it demanded a real confrontation. I told myself I was preserving peace. In reality, I was delaying clarity. The next few months felt heavier. Jason spent more time on his phone. Not obviously hiding anything, just present but not present. Conversations shortened, eye contact faded. The warmth that used to come naturally between us now felt scheduled, like something he remembered to perform occasionally. And then there was Patricia. She started showing up more often, unannounced, always with some reason that sounded harmless on the surface. I was just in the area. I thought you might need help organizing. I brought leftovers. Help that turned into criticism. Organizing that turned into rearranging my kitchen without asking. Leftovers that came with commentary about how I worked too much and didn't focus enough on being a wife. You know, she said one afternoon, standing in my living room while I was still in work clothes, laptop bag slipping off my shoulder. A man needs to feel taken care of in ways that aren't financial. I set my bag down slowly. Jason is taken care of. She smiled that same thin smile. Money isn't everything, Marissa. I almost laughed. Because for them, it was exactly everything. Dylan added his own layer to the tension, though his version came wrapped in careless energy rather than calculation. He started asking for things more directly now. No hesitation, no buildup. Hey Mari, can you help me out with a down payment for new recording equipment? This one's legit, like real opportunity. I looked at him across the living room, noticing how easily he said it, like asking for a glass of water. How much? Just $5,000. Just. I felt something tighten in my chest. That's not small, Dylan. He waved a hand. You make it back in like a week, right? Jason didn't correct him. That part mattered more than anything. He didn't defend me, didn't step in. Didn't say, that's not appropriate. He just sat there, scrolling on his phone, letting the expectation hang in the air like it belonged there. That was when I started noticing the silence. Not peaceful silence. Complicit silence. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The Bahamas trip came up during that period. Jason approached it gently, almost carefully, like he knew he needed to package it right. I've been thinking, he said one evening, sitting beside me on the couch, his hand resting lightly on my knee. We've both been stressed. Maybe we should get away, somewhere nice. Just reset. I looked at him, really looked this time. For a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with. Or maybe just the version of him I still wanted to believe in. A trip? I asked. He nodded, brushing his thumb against my knee. Yeah, somewhere warm, quiet, just us. Just us. That phrase should have meant something. Instead, it felt fragile. Still, I said yes, because part of me wanted to believe that if we stepped away from everything, his family, the routines, the tension, maybe we could find whatever we had lost. I didn't know yet that just us was never part of the plan. Within days, Patricia was involved. Then Dylan. Dylan asked about bringing Emma. And instead of pushing back, Jason said, it'll be fun, like a family thing. A family thing. Paid for by me. Planned by me. Expected of me. I remember sitting late at night at my desk, the glow of my laptop reflecting off the dark window, comparing resort packages, flights, insurance, excursions. Every detail had to be perfect. Not because I wanted luxury, because I knew if anything went wrong, it would somehow become my fault. As I clicked through options, I felt it again, that quiet pressure building in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something heavier. Something waiting. Looking back now, I think part of me already knew. The trip wasn't about reconnecting. It was a test, not of love. Of how much more I would tolerate before I finally said no. And the truth is, I was closer to that no than any of them realized. The dinner at Patricia's house was supposed to be about finalizing details. That's how Jason framed it. Just logistics, he said that afternoon while buttoning his shirt, his tone casual, almost reassuring. Flights, rooms, timing, nothing dramatic. I remember standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the sleeve of my blouse, watching my own reflection for a moment longer than usual. Nothing dramatic. Something in me didn't believe that, but I went anyway, because that's what I had been doing for 8 years, showing up, smoothing things over, giving situations the benefit of the doubt even when my instincts whispered otherwise. Patricia's house looked exactly the same as always. Too many decorative pillows. Artificial flowers that tried too hard to look real. The faint smell of something sweet and overly perfumed hanging in the air. It felt less like a home and more like a set, everything arranged just right, but none of it truly comfortable. She greeted us at the door wearing her pearls, her posture straight, her smile practiced. "Marissa," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek, "you look tired." "I've been working," I replied evenly. "Yes," she said, glancing briefly at Jason. "You always are." That was how it started. Small. Controlled. Dylan was already on the couch, strumming his guitar absent-mindedly. Emma sat on the floor again, bracelets clinking softly as she arranged her crystals in careful lines. "Energy's weird tonight," she murmured without looking up. I almost asked her if she meant the room or the people in it. Dinner began quietly enough. Plates passed. Polite questions exchanged. The sound of cutlery against porcelain filled the spaces where real conversation should have been. I answered Patricia's questions about work. Jason talked about a project he wasn't fully involved in, but described like it was his. Dylan mentioned a producer meeting that sounded suspiciously vague. I noticed how often Jason avoided looking directly at me. That was new. Not obvious enough for anyone else to question. But I felt it. The slight redirection of his eyes. The way his attention drifted just before it landed. My fingers tightened slightly around my fork. Then Patricia tapped her wine glass. A soft, delicate sound. But in that house, it might as well have been a siren. "Oh, before dessert," she said, smiling brightly, "we wanted to go over one small update to the trip." Small. Again. My stomach dropped, just slightly. I set my fork down slowly. What kind of update? Jason shifted beside me. I felt it before I saw it. The tension in his body, the way his knee moved just a fraction away from mine. He cleared his throat. "So, I actually invited someone." I turned to him fully now, my pulse starting to thud heavier in my chest. "Someone?" He nodded too quickly. "Yeah, it's not a big deal. I just thought, since we're all going, it might be nice." "Who, Jason?" There was a pause. Then he said it. "Vanessa." The name didn't hit like a shock. It landed like something cold and deliberate. Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend. The one he always described as complicated, but in the past. I blinked once, slowly. "Your ex." He gave a small, strained smile. "We're still friends." Friends. I could hear my heartbeat now. Feel it in my throat. In my fingertips. "And you thought," I said carefully, each word placed with precision, "it would be appropriate to invite your ex-girlfriend on a vacation your wife is paying for." Jason exhaled like I was already exhausting him. "You're making it sound worse than it is." Worse than it is. Before I could respond, Patricia leaned forward, placing her wine glass down with a soft click. "And," she added lightly, "Richard will be joining as well." I turned my head slowly toward her. "Richard," I repeated. "My ex-husband," she said, smiling as if she were announcing a delightful surprise. The room went completely still. For a moment, no one spoke. Dylan looked down at his guitar. Emma whispered something about shifting vibrations. Jason rubbed the back of his neck like this was all mildly inconvenient but manageable. And I sat there, staring at them, trying to understand how this had become real. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, my voice calm, too calm. "You invited your ex-girlfriend, and you," I looked at Patricia, "invited your ex-husband to a trip I planned, that I paid for." Jason sighed. "It's just a vacation, Marissa." I let out a short, quiet laugh, not amused. "Something sharper. A vacation," I repeated. "With your ex, and your mother's ex, all together." "It's not like that," he said quickly. "Then what is it like?" He didn't answer. Patricia did. "It's about family," she said smoothly. "We're all adults. There's no reason we can't be mature about things." I looked at her. Really looked this time. "Mature?" I said softly. "Is that what you call this?" Her smile thinned. "I call it inclusive." Inclusive. The word almost made me dizzy. I leaned back slightly in my chair, pressing my fingertips together just to ground myself. Jason shifted again. "You're overreacting." There it was. The familiar script. I turned to him slowly. "Overreacting." "Yes," he said, more firmly now. "It's not a big deal unless you make it one." I stared at him, at the man I had spent 8 years building a life with, at the man who had just invited his ex-girlfriend into our marriage space and expected me to fund the experience. "You invited her," I said quietly, "without asking me." "I knew you'd say no," he admitted. The honesty hit harder than any lie. "And you're okay with that?" I asked. He frowned. "With what?" "Doing something you knew would disrespect me and expecting me to accept it anyway." He didn't respond, because there was no good answer. Patricia crossed her arms. "This trip isn't just about you, Marissa." I looked at her. "No," I said softly. "That's been very clear for a long time." The silence that followed felt different, not tense, final. I reached for my napkin, placed it gently on the table, and stood. Jason looked up, confused. "Where are you going?" I picked up my bag from the chair behind me. "I'm leaving." Patricia's voice sharpened. "Sit down. We're not finished." I met her gaze, steady and calm. "I am." Jason stood halfway. "Marissa, don't do this." "Do what?" I asked. "Refuse to pay for my own humiliation? That's not what this is." I tilted my head slightly. "Then what is it, Jason?" Again, no answer, because the truth was too obvious now. I walked toward the door, my heartbeat strangely steady, my breathing even. Behind me, Patricia's voice rose. "You're ruining this family." I paused just long enough to turn my head slightly. "This family," I said quietly, "was never mine to begin with." Then I walked out. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp, and for a second I just stood there on the porch, my hand still on the door handle, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside me. Not anger, not grief. Clarity. I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and rested my hands there, staring straight ahead. And then I laughed, soft at first, then deeper, because for the first time in years, something made sense. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a pattern, and I had finally seen it clearly enough to stop participating in it. When I got home that night, the house felt different. It wasn't louder. It wasn't colder. Nothing had physically changed. But for the first time in years, I walked through the front door and didn't feel like I was entering a place where I had to perform. I slipped off my heels slowly, placing them neatly by the wall out of habit, then paused in the quiet of the living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. No television, no voices, no expectations waiting for me the second I stepped inside. Just silence. I poured myself a drink, my hands steady, the glass cool against my fingers. The amber liquid caught the low light as I carried it to the couch and sat down, leaning back slowly, letting my body finally feel the weight of the evening. I replayed the dinner in my head. Jason's voice, casual. Patricia's smile, calculated. The word overreacting landing exactly where it always did. And then, the moment he said it, I knew you'd say no. That was the part I couldn't stop circling. Not the ex-girlfriend, not the ex-husband, the decision. He had made a choice, fully aware of how I would feel, and then moved forward anyway. I let out a slow breath, pressing my thumb lightly against the rim of the glass. "What did I miss?" I whispered to the empty room. Because women like me don't just wake up one day in a broken marriage. We pass through warning signs. We negotiate with discomfort. We justify things that should have stopped us cold. I closed my eyes for a moment, and memories started lining up in ways they never had before. Every "just this once." Every "it's not a big deal." Every time I swallowed a reaction because I didn't want to escalate. I wasn't blindsided. I had been worn down. The sound of the front door opening pulled me back. I didn't move. Jason stepped inside a few seconds later, his footsteps slower than usual, like he was trying to measure the mood before committing to it. "Marissa?" he called. "In here," I said, my voice calm. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his collar, watching me for a moment before stepping further into the room. "You made a scene," he said. "Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'We need to talk.' You made a scene." I took a sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch just enough to make him uncomfortable. "I left," I corrected. "There's a difference." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You embarrassed me in front of my family." I tilted my head slightly. "Did I, or did the situation embarrass you?" His jaw tightened. "You're twisting this." "No," I said quietly. "I'm clarifying it." He stepped closer, his frustration becoming more visible now, the mask slipping just enough. "It wasn't a big deal, Marissa. You blew it up." I set my glass down on the table, carefully. "You invited your ex-girlfriend," I said, my voice still even, "on a vacation I planned and paid for, without asking me. And you're telling me that's not a big deal?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because again, there was no good answer. "It's just a trip," he tried again, softer this time, as if changing the tone would change the truth. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. He looked away. That small movement, his inability to meet my eyes, told me more than anything he had said all night. "I need you to answer one thing honestly," I continued. He hesitated, then nodded once. "Okay." I held his gaze. "Did you think about how I would feel before you invited her?" The silence that followed was long enough to matter. Finally, he said, "I knew you wouldn't like it." "That's not what I asked." He swallowed, shifting his weight. "No," he admitted. The word landed clean. No excuses, no justification, just truth. I nodded slowly, sitting back again, letting that settle between us. "Thank you," I said. He frowned slightly. "For what?" "For being honest, at least once." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or defensiveness. "You're acting like I betrayed you," he said. I let out a quiet breath. "You didn't betray me tonight, Jason," I replied. His brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said softly, "tonight just made it impossible for me to keep pretending you hadn't been doing it for years." He went still. That landed. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped, just slightly, in the way his eyes shifted, searching for something to hold on to. "You're being dramatic again," he muttered. There it was. Predictable. Comforting even, in how familiar it sounded. I stood up slowly, walking past him toward the kitchen, not because I needed anything, but because I needed space. Because if I stayed too close, I might start explaining myself. And I was starting to realize I didn't need to. "I'm not yelling," I said over my shoulder. "I'm not accusing. I'm not even arguing." I turned back to face him, meeting his eyes fully now. "I'm just done explaining why something is wrong when you already know it is." His expression hardened. "So what? You're just going to throw everything away over this?" I felt something shift again inside me. Not sharp, not explosive, clear. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said quietly. "I'm just finally acknowledging what's already gone." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Because the version of me he knew would have kept trying, would have softened this moment, would have found a way to turn this into a conversation about compromise. But that version of me was getting quieter by the second. "I'm going upstairs," he said abruptly, turning away. The bedroom door slammed a moment later. The sound echoed through the house. I stood there in the kitchen, my hands resting lightly against the counter, staring at nothing, listening to the silence settle again. And then something inside me clicked, not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. I walked back into the living room, picked up my laptop, and sat down. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a second. Then I opened the booking confirmations. Flights, resort, excursions. Every detail I had spent hours perfecting. Every arrangement made with the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could feel right again. I stared at the first reservation, and for the first time, I didn't feel pride. I felt clarity. I moved the cursor slowly, and I clicked. The first cancellation felt unreal. Not difficult, not emotional, just precise. I clicked cancel reservation, read the confirmation prompt, and selected yes without hesitation. A small notification appeared on the screen. Refund pending, cancellation processed. That was it. 8 years of saying yes, undone by a single click. I stared at the screen for a moment, expecting something dramatic to happen inside me. Guilt, panic, doubt, nothing came. Only a strange, expanding lightness in my chest. So I moved on to the next booking. Flights, business class, carefully selected seats, departure times aligned with everyone's preferences. Cancel. The villa, 5-star, ocean view, the one Patricia insisted would be acceptable. Cancel. The excursions, snorkeling, boat tours, curated experiences designed to keep everyone entertained so they wouldn't turn on each other. Cancel. Each confirmation email that appeared felt like a quiet detachment, not from the trip, from the version of myself who believed I had to hold everything together. By the time I finished, the list of reservations was gone, replaced by a clean inbox filled with cancellations and pending refunds. I leaned back slowly, exhaling. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Not of them, of myself. I opened the family group chat next. The one Jason's sister had created months ago. It was filled with Patricia's recipes nobody followed, Dylan's memes that never landed, and Jason's occasional messages reminding me of things I already knew. I attached every cancellation email, one by one. Then I typed a single message. Trips canceled. No refunds. Please don't contact me about it. I read it once. No explanation. No apology. No emotional cushioning. I hit send. The silence lasted exactly 12 seconds. Then my phone exploded. Calls, messages, notifications stacking so fast the screen could barely keep up. Patricia, Dylan, Jason, even Emma. I watched it all without touching the phone. There was something almost fascinating about it. For years, I had been the one anticipating their reactions, managing their expectations, cushioning every inconvenience before it could escalate. Now I was watching them react in real time, without me softening the impact. Jason came downstairs first, fast. His footsteps heavy, sharp against the floor. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice tight, controlled in that way that meant it was seconds from breaking. I didn't look up from my laptop. "What do you think I did?" He stepped closer, grabbing his phone, scrolling quickly. I could hear his breathing change. "You canceled it," he said, disbelief creeping in. "You canceled everything." "Yes." His head snapped up. "You had no right." That word again. Right. I finally closed my laptop and looked at him. "For 8 years, I said calmly, the only right I've had in this family is the right to pay. I decided to revoke that." His face flushed. "This isn't just about you." I tilted my head slightly. Exactly. That seemed to hit something. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "Yes." "You embarrassed me," he snapped. I almost smiled. "You keep using that word," I said softly. "It's interesting." "What's interesting?" he shot back. "That your biggest concern isn't what you did," I replied. "It's how I responded to it." He stopped pacing. For a second, the room went still again. Then his phone rang. "Patricia." "Of course," he answered immediately. "Mom." I could hear her voice even from where I sat. Sharp, loud, demanding. "What do you mean everything's canceled? What did she do? Put her on the phone." Jason glanced at me, hesitating. I held out my hand. "Give it to me." He stared at me for a second, like he was trying to decide which version of me he was dealing with. Then he handed me the phone. I pressed it to my ear. "Hello, Patricia." Her voice hit me instantly. "What have you done?" I canceled the trip. "You had no authority to do that," she snapped. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Actually, I did. It was all under my name, my accounts, my cards." There was a pause. Short, but telling. "You're being childish," she said. I smiled faintly. "No. Childish is inviting ex-partners on someone else's dime and calling it family bonding." Her voice rose. We had plans. Yes, I said calmly. You did. You're ruining everything. I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. Patricia, I said softly, everything was already ruined. I just stopped funding it. She inhaled sharply, like I had physically struck her. You will regret this, she hissed. Maybe, I replied, but at least I'll regret it without paying for it. I ended the call before she could respond. Jason stared at me. You hung up on her. Yes, that's my mother. And this, I said quietly, gesturing around us, is my life. The words landed harder than anything else I had said, because for the first time, I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't softening. I wasn't asking to be understood. I was stating something final. His phone started ringing again, then mine. Then messages. Dylan texting about his equipment payments. Emma sending something about energy collapse. Patricia again. Jason's voice came out lower this time. You've started something you can't control. I met his eyes steadily. No, I said. I stopped something I should have ended years ago. The house felt different now. Not tense. Clear. Like something had been stripped away. Jason looked at me like he was trying to find the version of me he knew. The one who would fix this. The one who would apologize. The one who would open her laptop again and quietly rebook everything just to restore peace. But she wasn't there anymore. I'm calling my lawyer tomorrow, I said. He froze. What? I'm starting the separation process. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Irreversible. Jason blinked, like he hadn't expected the consequences to reach this far. This is insane, he said, his voice rising again. You're throwing away our marriage over a trip. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. I'm ending it because of everything the trip made impossible to ignore. Silence. Real silence this time. He didn't argue, didn't interrupt. Because somewhere, underneath all the denial, he understood. And for the first time in 8 years, so did I. The house didn't feel like a battlefield after that. It felt like a place where something had already died, and neither of us quite knew how to stand around it. Jason didn't come downstairs again that night. I heard movement upstairs. Drawers opening, the sound of pacing. Once, the sharp thud of something hitting the wall. Not thrown hard, just enough to release frustration without admitting it out loud. I stayed on the couch. Not because I couldn't go upstairs, but because I didn't want to share a room with someone who had already stepped outside the boundaries of what we were supposed to be. At some point, I turned off the lights and sat in the dim glow coming from the kitchen. My drink was gone, but I still held the glass loosely in my hand, tracing the rim with my thumb. The adrenaline had faded. What was left behind was heavier, not regret. Something closer to grief, because clarity doesn't erase history. It doesn't erase the years you spent believing in something that slowly became something else. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time that night, I let myself feel it. The weight of 8 years. The quiet compromises. The moments I had chosen patience over confrontation. The nights I told myself things would shift, that effort would eventually meet me halfway. My throat tightened. I really tried, I whispered into the empty room. And that was the truth that hurt the most. Not that I had been fooled, but that I had been sincere. Upstairs, a door closed. Footsteps again. Then silence. I didn't follow, because there was nothing left to say that would change anything. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. A message from Patricia. Of course, you've humiliated this family. Jason deserves better than this. You've always been cold. I stared at the screen, reading it twice. Cold. I let out a soft breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. For years, I had bent myself into something softer, quieter, more accommodating. And still, in the end, I was the cold one. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Not because I didn't have words, but because I was starting to understand that not every accusation deserves a response. The phone buzzed again. Dylan. Mari, this is messed up. My account's already negative because I planned around this. You could have just talked to us. Talk to us. I closed my eyes for a moment. I've been talking for years, I murmured under my breath. I didn't reply to him either. Another message. Jason, we need to fix this. I stared at it longer than the others, not because it moved me, because it felt familiar. That phrase, we need to fix this, as if this were a temporary problem, as if there were still something intact to fix. I typed slowly. There's nothing left to fix. I watched the message deliver. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his reply came. You're being irrational. I let out a quiet breath and set the phone face down on the table. There it was. Not confusion, not remorse, not reflection, just dismissal. That was the moment the last thread inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. I stood up slowly and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look outside. The street was quiet. A single car passed, headlights cutting through the dark before disappearing again. Everything out there kept moving. Everything in here had stopped. I rested my forehead lightly against the glass. For a second, I let myself imagine something else. A version of this night where Jason had followed me outside, where he had said, I messed up, where he had understood, where he had chosen me. The thought lingered just long enough to hurt. Then I let it go. Because that version of him didn't exist. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. I stepped back from the window, wrapping my arms loosely around myself, feeling the quiet settle deeper. This was the lowest point. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I finally accepted what that decision meant. I wasn't just ending a pattern. The routines, the shared space, the small, familiar habits that had once felt like home. The routines, the shared space, the small, familiar habits that had once felt like home. All of it dissolving. I walked upstairs slowly, each step deliberate. The bedroom door was closed. I paused in front of it, my hand hovering near the handle. For a moment, I almost opened it, almost walked in, almost tried one last time. Instead, I turned away. I went to the guest room, closed the door quietly behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence there felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just still. I lay down without turning on the light, staring into the dark, listening to my own breathing. For the first time in years, there was no one to manage, no tension to anticipate, no emotional weight pressing against me from the other side of the room. Just me. Alone. And strangely, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. Space. I closed my eyes slowly, and somewhere between the quiet and the exhaustion, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. I wasn't afraid of losing Jason. I was afraid of how long I had stayed. And that realization hurt more than anything else. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anxiety, because my mind was reorganizing. That's the only way I can describe it. Pieces of the past shifting into place. Conversations replaying with new clarity. Small details that had once felt harmless, now revealing patterns I could no longer ignore. By the time the first light crept through the curtains, I was already awake. Still, clear, certain. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, but my thoughts sharp, and for a moment I just listened. The house was quiet, no footsteps, no voices, just that early morning stillness that feels almost suspended between what was and what's coming next. I reached for my phone. No new messages from Jason. That, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't reflecting. He wasn't reconsidering. He was waiting for me to come back, for me to soften, for me to fix it. I set the phone down and stood, moving through the morning almost automatically. Coffee, water, a quick glance at my inbox, and then something new. An email I didn't recognize. Subject line. You deserve to know. My fingers paused above the screen. For a second, I almost ignored it. But something in me, the same instinct I had been suppressing for years, told me not to. I opened it. No greeting. No signature. Just a short message. Jason has been in contact with Vanessa for weeks. This trip wasn't just a reunion. It was planned. He told people he wanted to make you jealous. Richard is involved too. You're being set up to react. Attached below were screenshots. I stared at them. Message threads. Jason's name at the top. Vanessa's replies. Flirty. Casual. Familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. One line stood out. Let her see what she's losing. Maybe then she'll stop acting like she's better than everyone. My hand went still on the screen. Not shock. Not disbelief. Recognition. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The distance. The tone. The way he had avoided my eyes at dinner. This wasn't thoughtless. It was intentional. I sat back slowly, my chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just absorbed it. A few seconds later, another message came in, this time from Emma. Hey, I don't know if you saw everything yet, but you should. Jason's been talking to Vanessa for a while. Dylan heard him bragging about the trip last week. I thought you deserved to know. I stared at her name for a moment. Emma. The quiet one. The one who always seemed slightly out of place in that house. I typed back. Thank you for telling me. 3 dots appeared immediately. I'm sorry, she replied. This isn't right. No, it wasn't. But for the first time, I didn't feel confused about it. I felt grounded because now there was no space left for doubt. No room for maybe I misunderstood. No justification I could build to soften what had already happened. I stood up slowly, walking into the bathroom, turning on the light. My reflection looked the same, but something behind my eyes had changed. I studied myself for a moment. You're done, I said quietly. Not a question, a statement. And for the first time, it felt true all the way through. I walked back into the bedroom and picked up my phone again. Scrolled to one name, Nathan Qley. My lawyer. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice slightly rough with sleep. Marissa? Everything okay? I need to start the separation process, I said. There was a pause. Not surprised. Just attentive. Are you sure? He asked. Yes. Another pause. Then, all right, we can move quickly. Do you want this to be clean or aggressive? I thought about the screenshots, about the years, about the word provider echoing in Patricia's voice. Clean, I said, but thorough. He exhaled softly. Understood. I'll prepare everything. We'll freeze joint accounts, review shared assets, and file by the end of the day. Thank you. Marissa, he added before hanging up, you sound different. I looked toward the window, sunlight now filling the room. I am. After the call ended, I sat down again, opening my laptop. Not to fix anything, to close things properly. Joint accounts. Access permissions. Shared subscriptions. Every digital thread that tied my life to theirs. One by one. Systematically. By midday, everything was in motion. Legal paperwork drafted. Accounts flagged. Boundaries set. No drama. No confrontation, just action. Jason finally came downstairs around noon. He stopped when he saw me sitting at the table, my laptop open, my posture straight. You've been avoiding me, he said. I looked up calmly. No, I've been moving forward. He frowned. We need to talk. I closed my laptop. We already did. That wasn't a real conversation. It was, I said softly. You just didn't like the outcome. His jaw tightened. You're seriously doing this. I held his gaze. Yes. For what? He snapped. Because I invited someone you don't like? I studied him for a moment. And then I realized something that settled everything completely. He still didn't understand. Not because he couldn't. Because he didn't want to. This isn't about liking or not liking someone, I said quietly. It's about respect. And you crossed that line a long time ago. He scoffed. So now you're just going to walk away? I stood up slowly. Yes. The simplicity of it seemed to hit him harder than any argument could have. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe. I thought about that for a second. Then I shook my head slightly. No, I replied. I'll just regret not doing it sooner. I picked up my bag, walked past him, and for the first time in 8 years, I didn't look back. Because the hardest part wasn't leaving him. It was finally choosing myself. And once that decision is real, everything else becomes simple. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unraveled. Slowly at first, then all at once. 3 days after I filed the paperwork, my phone lit up again. Not with demands this time, but with panic. Patricia, what did you do to the accounts? I read the message while sitting at a small cafe downtown, sunlight spilling across the table, the quiet hum of people living their lives around me. For the first time, their chaos wasn't surrounding me. It was outside. I took a sip of my coffee before replying. I protected what was mine. Her response came instantly. You froze everything? Jason can't access anything. This is unacceptable. I exhaled softly. For years, unacceptable had been their favorite word whenever I stopped making things easy for them. Now it sounded empty. That's the point. I didn't add anything else because there was nothing left to explain. An hour later, Jason called. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. What did you do? He asked immediately. Same question, different tone. Less control this time. I followed legal advice, I said calmly. You locked me out of everything. Yes. A pause. Then, you can't just cut me off like that. I tilted my head slightly, though he couldn't see it. I've been carrying everything for years, Jason. You were never supposed to depend on it permanently. That's not the same thing, he snapped. It is now. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. You're overdoing this, he said finally, but the confidence in his voice had thinned. I'm finishing it, I corrected. Another pause. What about the house? He asked. It's in my name. He inhaled sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying, I replied, my voice steady, you'll need to make arrangements. The line went quiet. Then, you're kicking me out? I closed my eyes briefly. I'm asking you to respect what's already over. He laughed once, but it sounded strained. You think you can just erase 8 years like this? No, I said softly. You did that long before I ever touched those accounts. He didn't respond, because again, there was nothing to say. I ended the call first. Not out of anger, out of finality. By the end of the week, everything escalated. Not with me. Around me. Emma sent the first update. They tried to go to the airport anyway. I blinked at the message, then opened the video she attached. The camera was shaky, angled from a distance, but the scene was unmistakable. Patricia at the check-in counter. Her voice raised, sharp, demanding. There must be a mistake. My daughter-in-law booked everything. The airline employee remained calm, professional, repeating the same sentence. There are no active reservations under your names. Patricia's hand slammed against the counter. That's impossible. Behind her, Jason stood rigid, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression tight. Vanessa stood beside him. Not awkward, not unsure, comfortable. That detail didn't hurt. It clarified. Dylan was off to the side, half watching, half recording, while Emma whispered commentary under her breath. They're losing it, she murmured in the video. The camera shifted. Patricia now arguing with the supervisor. Jason running a hand through his hair, pacing. Vanessa stepping in, trying to smooth things over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then Richard, louder than everyone, accusing, demanding. The employee repeating again, tired now. The bookings were canceled by the cardholder. Jason froze. Even through the grainy video, I could see it. That moment, when reality landed, Emma's voice came through again. Yeah, this is bad. The video cut there. I sat back slowly, the cafe noise returning around me. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I felt distance, because for the first time, their consequences didn't require my involvement. Another message from Emma followed. They're blaming each other now. It's chaos. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. I hope you're okay. Her reply came quickly. I am. I just didn't realize how bad it was until now. Neither had I. Not fully, because when you adjust, you survive it. But from the outside, it looked exactly like what it was. A system built on taking, finally collapsing when there was nothing left to take. The legal side moved just as quickly. Nathan called me that afternoon. "Everything's been filed," he said. "Accounts secured, assets documented. We've also identified unauthorized withdrawals." My fingers tightened slightly around my cup. "How much?" "Approximately $9,000, he said. "Transferred over time. Listed as home expenses." I let out a quiet breath. "Patricia." "Looks that way," he confirmed. "Spa charges, cosmetic treatments, high-end dining." I almost smiled. I thought she meant plumbing. Nathan let out a soft laugh. "Different kind of maintenance." "What happens next?" I asked. "We pursue restitution. It's clean, documented. You're in a strong position." Strong. The word felt unfamiliar, but accurate. By the second week, the narrative started shifting publicly. At first, it was subtle. Comments under Jason's social posts, questions, then accusations. Someone mentioned the airport incident. Another brought up the canceled bookings. Then the screenshots. I never posted anything, never responded. But truth has a way of surfacing, especially when multiple people have pieces of it. Emma sent me another message. "People are starting to connect everything. It's not going well for them." I looked at the screen, then out the window. People walking, talking, laughing, life continuing. And for the first time, I wasn't carrying any of it. Not their reactions, not their image, not their consequences. Jason tried reaching out again. Long messages this time. Emotional, then defensive, then angry, then quiet. I didn't respond because silence was finally something I understood. By the end of the month, everything they had built on me collapsed without me. And I realized something sitting there, watching it all unfold from a distance. I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need to expose them. I didn't need revenge. All I had to do was stop. And everything they were revealed itself. 6 months later, I was no longer living in that house. I was no longer answering those messages. I was no longer the woman who measured her worth by how much she could carry for other people. The divorce finalized on a quiet Tuesday morning. No drama. No confrontation. Just a set of documents, neatly prepared, signed, and confirmed. Jason didn't fight it the way I thought he might. Maybe because by then, there wasn't much left to fight for. The accounts had been separated. The evidence was clear. The patterns were documented in a way that didn't rely on emotion, only facts. Misused funds, financial dependence. A long history of imbalance that no longer had my silence protecting it. In the end, he owed me restitution, $42,000. I remember looking at that number on the page and feeling nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication, just closure, because it was never really about the money. It was about everything that number represented. Years of quiet giving, years of being seen as a resource instead of a partner, years of explaining, adjusting, softening, until there was nothing left of me that felt fully mine. And now it was over. I moved to Milan 2 months after everything was finalized. It wasn't an escape. It was a choice. A small apartment overlooking a narrow canal, sunlight spilling across the balcony in the mornings, the sound of distant conversations drifting up from the street below. The space was simple, clean, intentional. Everything in it had a reason. Everything in it belonged to me. I worked remotely, taking on software projects that required a fraction of the energy I used to spend managing chaos. 3 hours a day, sometimes less. The rest of my time, I lived. I walked through streets that didn't carry history I was trying to forget. I sat in cafes where no one expected anything from me. I learned what quiet felt like when it wasn't filled with tension. At first, the silence felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. I would wake up expecting messages, demands, questions, complaints. I would reach for my phone out of habit, bracing myself for something that never came. And then slowly, that habit faded. The quiet stopped feeling empty. It started feeling safe. There was a cafe near my building, run by a man named Daniel. Early 30s, dark curls, sharp eyes that noticed more than he said. The first time I walked in, he handed me my coffee before I even ordered. "You look like someone who needs this," he said. I smiled faintly. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged. "Only to people who've been there." We started talking. Not all at once, not in long, dramatic conversations, just small moments. A comment about the weather, a joke about tourists, a shared look when someone spilled coffee and tried to pretend it didn't happen. And then gradually, more. He told me about his photography, about his grandmother who once chased a thief down the street with a wooden spoon, about the way he saw the world, not as something to control, but something to observe. I told him pieces of my past, edited, simplified. "I was married once," I said one afternoon as we sat outside, sunlight warming the table between us. "What happened?" he asked. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "I confuse being needed with being loved." He nodded slowly, like he understood that without needing more explanation. "That's a common mistake," he said. "We didn't rush anything. We didn't define anything. But there was something steady there, something calm, something that didn't ask me to prove my worth. And that alone felt new." One morning, about a year after everything ended, I found an envelope under my door. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Jason. I made coffee before opening it. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't want to rush into whatever it contained. Inside was a single page. 3 lines. "You were right. I'm sorry. It was never about the trip." I read it once, then again, and I waited for anger, for satisfaction, for something. But all I felt was stillness. Because the apology didn't change anything. It didn't undo the years. It didn't restore what had been lost. It didn't give back the version of me that had stayed too long. It was just acknowledgement. Late. Quiet. Final. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as something to hold on to, just something that had happened. That afternoon, I met Daniel by the canal. We sat on a bench, sharing a sandwich, watching people pass by without any urgency to be anywhere else. "You seem lighter today," he said, glancing at me. I smiled slightly. I let go of something I didn't realize I was still carrying. He raised an eyebrow. "Important?" "Not anymore." He nodded like that was enough, and it was. Because that's the thing no one tells you about healing. It doesn't always feel like a breakthrough. Sometimes it feels like nothing, like a quiet space where something heavy used to be. That night, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out over the water reflecting the city lights. No noise, no demands, no one expecting anything from me. Just peace. Real peace. The kind you don't have to negotiate for. The kind you don't have to earn. My name is Marissa Hale. I spent 8 years being everything for people who saw me as a resource. I canceled their trip. I ended my marriage. And I chose a life where my worth isn't measured by what I provide, but by the peace I protect. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop. And once you do,